'70s, my wife and I purchased the Spotlight, so I can speak kind of from then on. The history of the Spotlight, it began, how many people in this room remember George Kaporis? How many in this room remember Jimmy Kaporis? You do? Jimmy and George were brothers. Jimmy had this goal in life to become a journalist. And there was a small newspaper, I think it was called the South Sider or something of that nature. And the fellow that owned it was not the quickest payer in the world, and Jimmy, wanting to be the big journalist, would write, and this guy might be a week or two or sometimes three behind in paying. But George, being a little more on the dollar cent side, said, "You can't do that. You've got to get paid." "Well, don't worry. Well, one day, they had the paper all ready to go to the printer, and George and Jimmy marched into this guy's office. And George said, "You owe my brother Jimmy however many dollars. And unless you pay him right now, these papers are going right into that pot-bellied stove." And the guy came he hawed around. Well, if you knew George, he had a pretty quick temper. And guess what? In they went. The next day, the Spotlight was founded. First issue, February 16, 1939. And it went on from there. As time went on, the war came along. Jimmy and George both were drafted into the Army. They sent George home because he had flat feet. He was kind of caught. I don't know if that was. But anyway, Jimmy goes off to war. George stays around. Now, George really did not want to run the newspaper. But his mother, God bless her, you remember the old office at 1469 South Meridian? Across from Loud's funeral home. That was a lot of things. George's dad George's father passed away. And his mother, it was a laundry pickup, it was a confectionery store, whatever. But that's where they had the Spotlight. So during the war, his mother said, "You're not going to desert this paper, you're going to save it for Jimmy when he comes back." So Jimmy comes back from the war, and he had met and married a young lady whose home was Chicago. And she had very little interest in living in Annapolis, so Jimmy was living in Chicago with her, and George kept saying, "Come back here, get back, I want to do something else." And finally he issued the ultimatum, "Either you come back and take this paper, or I'm just going to take it over to your house." Well, Jimmy, being a good, loyal, married man, like all of us fellows here are, said, "You got it, pal." So that became George's newspaper. And George of Virginia published the Spotlight almost every week from 1939 until 1979. Now, came time for a vacation, they would just put a key in the door, lock it, and go to Las Vegas or San Francisco or wherever. George had a column he called the Nutcracker. I'm sure many folks in this room remember the Nutcracker, and probably a lot of you had your name in there. Because George's favorite, I don't want to say gimmick, but he'd go to some gathering. And he always had his notebook and his little pencil. And he'd see Fred Shaw, and he'd say, "Well, I saw Fred and Len Shaw, and they were doing this and that, the other thing. Eric Grueling, Mary Beth, and on down." And then he would put the Nutcracker in various pages. He never put it in the same page. You know why? Because he had to thumb through that paper to look for it. Now, as you're thumbing through the paper, it's a better chance that you're going to see the advertisement. But anyway, that was quite a popular thing, and George made a